you can count when you're happy. 1, 2, 3, 4, you can count when you're sad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or count when you're frightened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, count when you're mad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Counting is wonderful. Counting is marvelous. Counting's terrific and how.
It's Stalker Week on Smallville. We've got not one chauvinist whack job this time, but two. Lana's being stalked by an older kid named Andy and his alcoholic cronies who won't stay out of the Talon with their flasks. Andy acts like he's king of Smallville and can do anything he wants, including taking physical advantage of Lana when she tries to enforce the rules, and he throws her against a shelf when she calls the police. Then there's Paul, Helen's crazy ex-boyfriend, who decides to come back into Helen's life and force her to be with him when he finds out she's getting serious with Lex and gets jealous. Hey Lex, I thought you destroyed all those tabloids. Paul will go to any lengths to get Helen back, including smashing his own face with a mirror and blaming it on Lex, and even killing one of Lex's security guys. Wow, are these really extreme sexual predators? Sure, there are a handful of mentally unbalanced men who give into their base instincts and see women they desire as their property, but the numbers are really disproportionate in this reality. And neither of these guys are even Kryptofreaks. Lana can't get through a school year without being harassed, kidnapped, or abused by some idiot loser who's made her his whole world. She might be entitled and selfish, but one thing I can say for her, it's kind of impressive she hasn't developed any paranoid delusions about men as a species. I'm not sure I wouldn't ask Lex to buy me an island and start New Themyscira if I were her. So while Lana and Helen are victimized by these pigs, Clark and Lex are caught in the middle. Clark comes into the Talon just as Lana gets thrown around by Andy because, as we know, 75% of violence in Smallville involves tossing people up against stuff. The Talon is about to close, so I have no idea why Clark is just moseying on in there right at this crucial moment, and we're never told. I'm also not sure how much Clark knows about the situation. He hasn't developed super hearing yet, but as uncontrollably incensed as he is, you'd think he's somehow aware that this guy intended to do a lot more than throw her around. He says, "Let's go into the back and have a private party." Clark can't leave well enough alone, so in full-on macho mode, he follows them into the alley, tries to intimidate them by getting ahead of them with his super speed, and tells them never to come back. Andy says he's thinking about returning tomorrow. Clark won't back down, they all rush him, and Clark goes for his signature move and throws Andy, without any regard to what might happen to him when he comes down into the new sheriff's cop car. I like that she doesn't just happen to be passing by like Clark just happened to show up to the Talon when it was closing. Lana pushed a panic button and she's answering the call, although I've worked at plenty of restaurants and none of them ever had a button you could push that would immediately summon the police. Immature prankster high school and college kids work at these kinds of places. Having a panic button is like putting a sign in your yard that says, "This house is low on TP." Then again, maybe Lana's just getting wise about how many freaks have tried to kill her. She should also have a laser grid, attack dogs, 25 security cameras, and a moat surrounding an electric perimeter fence. Now, Sheriff Adams did get there really fast, but it's a small town after all, he said facetiously. Remember that when we get to the big climax. So now Clark's in deep garbage, having to do 40 hours of community service instead of facing a $1,500 fine. Lana doesn't have enough evidence to charge Andy with anything, and all the by-the-book straight-shooter Sheriff Adams knows is Clark threw an unarmed kid across her windshield. That, and that Lana makes a great cappuccino, because if this super shrewd lady didn't start showing a sense of humor, she'd look as generic as the last sheriff, and I'd start suspecting her for every death in Smallville. Meanwhile, Lex is acting all gracious and civil around Paul, who claims he just wants to catch up with Helen. His Lex sense is tingling, and he suspects Paul's going to try something. And it turns out he's right when he says he's a frighteningly good judge of character. Paul is stalking Helen at the hospital, and probably does something to Helen's car to strand her there, so he has an excuse to make a move, just as Lex accuses him of. Paul offers Helen a ride, and she refuses, having just called Lex, and he shows up in like 5 seconds. Remember, super small town. Again, don't forget that point. It's going to become really important in just a couple minutes. Lex warns Paul to stay away from Helen. We all know where this is going. And so he goes back to his hotel and smashes his face into a mirror. Okay, so that part was maybe less predictable. So he can accuse Lex of attacking him and file charges against him. So now Lex is in hot water just like Clark, but since the sheriff is still investigating, he's not quite to orange vest status yet. You'd think his struggle with anger management might come up here. Remember when he took a 9-iron to a meter maid's car? But I guess Adams doesn't get that far in her investigation before Paul assaults Helen at the hospital. He spews a little exposition and gives his side of their relationship. Earlier, Helen tells Lex she doesn't understand why he's so obsessed with her, says they were never very serious and it was a relationship of convenience. She broke it off when she found out Paul beat his ex, and she didn't want to experience that firsthand. She is apparently not a good judge of character, frighteningly or otherwise. Paul thinks she broke up with him because he would never have made a good doctor. They met in medical school, and she didn't have time for someone who wasn't the best. Her motto was, if you can't be the best, why even try? Which I kind of like. I see even more now why Lex would be so enamored with her. So he worked hard at being successful and was going to try to win her back until he found out about Lex and decided he had to save her from him. So he gets possessive, tells Helen how she feels and how things are going to be. You don't love Lex, you love me, you just don't know it yet. But when she answers Lex's call and tells him where they are, things get physical, and she ends up in a battered mess after Paul wipes a counter filled with glass beakers with her. This is a really violent and bloody episode, even for Smallville. Clark gets involved because we can't have a climax that doesn't involve his using his powers to save the day, and now they're both taking the law into their own hands, despite Sheriff Adams' warnings about getting involved in police business. Lex makes a compelling argument. While the sheriff is waiting for a warrant to search Paul's hotel room, he's got plenty of time to get out of town. She tells him she's doing everything she can, and I like how frustrated she is that the system has her hands tied behind her back while still trying to handle this by the rules. She set up roadblocks everywhere, but what good are roadblocks when your fugitive can just get on a train? The final showdown takes place at the Smallville train station. Yeah, this tiny town has a train station. Lex and Clark track Paul there using LoJack. Lex corners him and holds him at gunpoint, planning to fake the murder so it looks like self-defense. He hands Paul his security guard's gun, the guy Lex had following Paul and who Paul murdered. Lex and Clark found him in Paul's hotel room, and Lex took his gun. Not sure why Paul didn't take it. Man, you do not want to be a security guard named Meacham. First this guy, then Edward Meacham in House of Cards. At least he lasted 3.5 seasons. Spoiler alert, and now he's Mr. Freeze. Okay, I've derailed the Amtrak. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah, subterfuge. Paul shoots at Lex, either stupid or delusional enough to think Lex would actually load it. Paul catches Lex off guard and kicks him, even though Lex knew the gun wasn't loaded. So we can stretch this confrontation out, and because the end of it has to happen inside of something, so Clark can't be seen using his powers. Lex and Paul go at it inside a train car. Lex loses his gun. Paul goes for an axe, because bad guys always have to get the horror movie weapons out in this show, and it's always unintentionally hilarious. Clark x-rays the car, sees what Paul is doing, super shakes it, and Lex gets the upper hand. Gets his gun back, wants to shoot Paul, thinks about shooting Paul, doesn't shoot Paul. He's on the precipice, but he doesn't go over it. Yet. The sheriff shows up and is ready to lay down the law on Lex for interfering in police business, but he throws the citizen's arrest argument at her, and she's livid. She goes all Roz from Monsters Incorporated. I'm watching you! Always watching! Clark's run-in with the law is a lot less involved, but still naturally ends in violence, though happily, both subplots don't end with Clark stopping someone unseen at the last minute. And surprisingly, there's no rude super-speed exits, no convenient unconsciousness, and no bullet time. Clark uses his x-ray vision on Andy and finds out this loser is faking his injuries, but he doesn't have any way to prove it short of violating a restraining order, pulling the guy's neck brace off, and getting fined or more hours of community service. As with Lex and Helen, but more literally, we have a role reversal in which the girl saves the guy. Lex drifts into the other subplot long enough to give Lana a crash course in self-defense. She's sick of being saved by Clark all the time, so she starts learning kickboxing and takes it upon herself to invite her would-be rapist to the Talon to work things out behind closed doors. She tells him she knows he's faking his injuries and gives him a chance to give up the lawsuit. Because his two goals in life are screwing over everyone he can and screwing every girl he can, whether she's interested or not, she has to resort to using her new skill set and KOs him.
Supreme victory!
In the loft, Clark thanks her for saving him for a change. Lana beating up Andy makes him draw the lawsuit, presumably because he couldn't keep faking after she knocked him to the ground, but I'm not sure. It all happens off screen. At the end, in an ultra-romantically lit scene in Lex's office by the fire, Lex similarly thanks Helen, saying in the moment where he decided not to shoot Paul, Helen saved him. Lex pops the question, she seems delighted and kisses him, then credits. I like the way these two subplots are interwoven and discussing a couple of disparate issues in different ways. The stories are different enough that the thematic parallels don't feel too forced, and they blend together enough that both happening at once feels as natural as a psychopath showing up to try to make his girlfriend come back to him and a sexual deviant trying to force himself onto the manager of a coffee shop at the same time can. Both are about men mistreating women, how the men who care about those women try to protect them, how those women feel about being mistreated, and about the men who gallantly try to come to their rescue, and they're both about the effectiveness of law enforcement in these cases and when it's right to work outside the law to bring abusers to justice. I like that the episode addresses the classic and typical damsel in distress scenario that's a major part of Smallville's formula, and it updates and subverts that without throwing either Clark or Lex under the bus. It says women can take care of themselves and don't necessarily need men to do their fighting for them, but it doesn't condemn the men for wanting to be there for the people they care about. Sure, Clark is overprotective of Lana, and maybe he's even a little obsessed with keeping her safe. But again, this is a girl who gets attacked on a semi-weekly basis for the viewing audience's pleasure, and often by threats that nobody but Clark is equipped to handle. And Lex is equally paranoid, which is more than well established by now, and considering how many times he's been kidnapped, shot, framed, or somebody's tried to ruin him financially, it's somewhat justified that he'd expect someone as shifty-eyed as Paul to be up to no good. We'll find out before too long that Lex is such a good judge of character, he was actually right about Helen in the first place. But in really different ways, the men find they need the women just as much as they're needed, and like last episode, everyone except for the bad guys are sympathetic, believable, and don't suck. I mean, Chloe and Pete make fun of Clark for having to pick up trash, and it's maybe weird to laugh at a guy for ostensibly breaking a kid's neck the same way you might if he got caught speeding for the first time, or was arrested for public nudity. Other than that, though, nobody sucks. Speaking of Helen's moral character, and spoiler alert, but I always thought Helen's turn at the end of the season felt retroactive and poorly seated. But there's some nice, subtle foreshadowing of it at the end of this episode. Lex's proposal is so romantic, it should be in a jewelry commercial. And the music has a lot to do with that atmosphere. But if you're paying attention, it waxes more tragic than it lets on. That slow, soft acoustic guitar number is a cover of Don't Fear the Reaper, a song that opens with the lyric, "All our times have come, here, but now they're gone." And it constantly evokes Romeo and Juliet. I never picked up on this before, but before you could say, I gotta have more cowbell, I'm realizing this time around, oh, this scene is telling me this relationship is doomed. Lex has a chance to definitively become a stone-cold murderer and get away with it, which would drop him face first into his dark, horrifying destiny. He avoids taking that exit into the wilderness, and we're left with an unsettling scene that's telling us life is going to continue to throw every obstacle in his path to keep him from happiness and try to force him to become the ruthless president with the black glove. The show continues to do an excellent job of making me wonder whether the man we know Lex will become is simply in his nature, or whether he has a choice and someday he'll make enough wrong ones, he'll be on a path he can't come back from. And we have another good parallel course with Clark, who, unlike Lex, whose heart is in the wrong place but he ultimately makes the right choice, has his heart in the right place and in the heat of the moment makes the wrong choice and has to face the repercussions. Clark has gone about things the wrong way with his powers before, as Jonathan said in Ryan when he broke Ryan out of Summerhold, but he hasn't really engaged in this sort of excessive force before, and when he's gotten violent, it's usually been because there's no other way to deal with a situation. Part of the reason he hasn't had to face this kind of music before now, of course, is because bad guys usually either have plot armor or get killed in a way that looks accidental, so Clark can't be held responsible. He does all kinds of things that could get someone killed, and to Kryptofreaks whose powers wouldn't protect them from the kind of thrashing they often get from the sophomore of steel. But we've got to fill our action quota, so watch a superpowered kid throw other kids up against walls and into cars like the easily amused, drooling ding-dong you are, and don't ask questions. This time, we kind of address how hard it would be for Clark to hurt someone on accident. Yeah, he's trying to protect Lana, and that's where I get off saying his heart's in the right place, but it's a fight he doesn't have to pick. There are other ways to handle a pervert who won't leave your would-be girlfriend alone. Lex going Batman at the end on Paul is maybe justified. But this is a job for the police, not Superman. And I like the way his parents handle it. Martha tells Clark that he's going to make split-second decisions he'll have to live with for the rest of his life. They aren't just scolding him for getting too involved or letting his emotions get the better of him. They're acknowledging that he's going to make mistakes, and it's as important to learn to live with those and to learn from them as it is to live by his moral code. Sheriff Adams shakes things up for Clark and forces him to be smarter about how he saves people, both in preserving a secret and in being responsible with his powers. Adams is like having Maggie Sawyer watching his every move. She's sharp, committed, and totally against vigilantism, which of course is sort of what he's had to be so far, trying to stop crimes without a costume. Maybe now is the time to think about putting on an outfit? Nope. Really? Okay. I like her hard-headed Southern mentality, and I like that she doesn't come off as a stereotype. She seems to know about some of Smallville's weirdness, not the Kryptofreaks and their powers necessarily, but that a lot of messed up stuff happened on Sheriff Ethan's watch. And she has an I'm gonna clean up this town attitude, which is neat because while she immediately makes Clark her enemy, she's hard but fair, kind of like Principal Reynolds, a driven, proactive person who's passionate about making her corner of the world a better place. A good role model for a passive, mopey proto-Superman who waits for danger to come to him and isn't sure how what he does fits into a society governed by the rule of law yet. I also like introducing your tough and grizzled female sheriff in an episode about traditional versus more progressive gender expectations. Once again, our antagonists are unnecessarily exaggerated and come off like soap opera villains in a world of otherwise understanding and believable people. At least for this particular episode. I actually like Paul more than I do Andy because he at least clearly has a mental condition and needs help, as Lex suggests toward the end. And I like that Lex nearly murders a man who has a possibly valid temporary insanity plea. That would have been even worse than if he murdered a perfectly sane man doing exactly the same thing. But he's still wildly over the top, and it might have been nice to get more of a sense of how he became this way so he wouldn't seem like just a plot device to bring Lex and Helen closer and to give Lex someone to want to murder. It's also harder to care at all about what happens to Helen this episode on a second viewing of the season once you know what she's hiding, because she's going to turn out to be quite a piece of work herself. I kind of dreaded this one because it feels like a waste of time putting her in this kind of danger, making her a victim, only to have her turn out to be another of Lex's crazy girlfriends/wives. But I had forgotten how front and center Lex is here. This isn't Helen's story, and the episode deliberately puts her as far in the background as it can get away with, which again makes me think there may have been more forethought about her arc through the season than I realized. But what am I doing? I'm supposed to be complaining about things. Annie doesn't feel remotely like someone who actually would exist. Again, a little background would go a long way if you could find a natural way to get it in there. I have a hard time buying a bully who tries to force himself on a girl not once but twice in the same establishment while trying to win $1 million lawsuit with a super risky scheme involving pretending to be injured. And he makes Clark and Lana seem almost too understanding. Both of them try to reason with him, knowing, or at least Lana knows, not sure about Clark, that he tried to rape Lana. I also have a hard time believing his lawsuit would hold up in court. They can't prove he doesn't have the injuries, but wouldn't he have to prove it with a doctor's note or something? It seems like it would be a lot harder than this to fake the neck brace. Some of the logistics of the legal issue seem murky to me. I am in no way an expert, but regardless of what Clark does to Andy, and even if he really was injured, which honestly I think would have been more interesting, Clark having to deal with the consequences of actually breaking a guy's neck, how does Lana have no case? I'm harping on this a lot, but the guy explicitly said he wanted to physically abuse her. There aren't any witnesses besides Andy's idiot friends, but Clark is a witness to part of it. They threw her against that shelf. Sure, it could have fallen over in some other way, but she was slammed into it really hard, and Clark found her lying next to it. And she doesn't have any cuts or bruises anywhere? Can't she at least get this guy for sexual harassment? Likewise, I don't quite get the resolution. Lana roundhouse kicks the guy and he drops the lawsuit. You know, like it's in his hand and he drops it when she kicks him. It seems more likely Andy would try to sue her for unprovoked assault, unless it was obvious he was faking his injuries by the time the sheriff arrived, but we're not told that. And Clark tells Lana that the sheriff commented on her karate skills, saying she has quite a spin kick. But how would she know? She wasn't there. A lot of fans called this the beginning of Lana's Power Ranger period and found her training a little silly. I think it's a good idea, and I don't know why she didn't think of it herself earlier, but it's laid on a little thick at the end. Look at Lana. She's an ex-cheerleader who's now all badass. It would be fine if she just took out the guy and it wasn't shot like Power Rangers, and that Rise Up to a Different Beat song is a little much. But that's all the fault of the directing and post-production before it says anything about Lana herself or what Kristen Kirk was doing with it. Obviously, I'm not saying it's silly because it's a girl in a fight scene. I'm saying this show often doesn't handle this sort of action very well. And now for questions to ask Jarrell when I get to heaven. Just one. How, pray tell, does a town the size of Smallville have a train station? And not just a little stop with a couple of trains that run through town and go through one terminal. We're talking big city, Harry Potter, platform 9 3/4 stuff. Not only would a town with one coffee shop where everyone knows everyone not have a huge train station, but even a town the size we know Smallville is, with a population of 45,000 people, which is a small city before it's a town, wouldn't have that. And let's go on to the count. There's not a lot here. Again, we've got one Lana stalker. We've got one instance of somebody walking away angry. Lana, when she says, "You're always there to save me, I just wish for once I could have saved myself." She's not angry so much as she's frustrated, but I'm going to count it anyway. And we also have one instance of Clark and Lana in the loft. That's a couple of those in a row. I'm giving Precipice a 3 out of 4. More solid character progression for Clark and Lex, and Lana even, and a story that juggles a couple of real-world issues in thoughtful and compelling ways. But it veers hard into soap opera territory, and the big city mentality about a small Midwestern town makes it really hard to take seriously. Was there anything I missed in any category? Leave me a personal message on Geekvolution, and I'll be sure to add it to the count. I'm Captain Logan, and consider this episode counted.